So today's Coffee with Carrie, I want to talk a little bit about retail digital transformation and where we were 15 years ago versus today. A lot has changed, and unless you kind of stop and take a look back of it, we don't realize what life was like really 15 years ago versus today. So 15 years ago, a lot of companies that are the most progressive and everyday life that we use weren't around 15 years ago. So we get a lot of questions from retail executives on how they should be thinking about retail digital transformation and connecting online and offline stores, e-commerce, and brick and mortar. And I want to talk a little bit about today about where what retail executives should be thinking about. There's been a lot of hires recently on digital transformation officers, digital innovation roles, things like that. So let's talk just for a few minutes about some of the companies that weren't around. So Facebook, Facebook was, wasn't even around, and people thought, who's going to, post all these things about their life and share pictures and stories and things like that. We had no Instagram, there was no Snapchat, there was no WhatsApp. None of these things existed 15 years ago, and today it's a standard way of life. Um, and people are sharing, pretty much every moment of their life, every moment of their kids' life, every moment of business life, LinkedIn, things like that, weren't around. One of the ones I think's, very funny and interesting is, Uber. If you would have talked to, and still today, if you would have talked to, taxi cities and taxi companies, even rental car companies, and said, hey, we're going to roll out this concept where random people, strangers, are going to pick you up and take you instead of, a town car or a limo or a taxi cab or taking public transportation, people would say. And people said, there's no way that you're going to get in a car with a stranger. You're going to just, randomly hit a button on the app. Somebody's going to appear. And to think about the flip side of it is how many part-time jobs, entrepreneurs that Uber has created. As I've taken Uber over the years, and it's obviously spun up Lyft and all these other ride-sharing companies. These are folks that, some people do this as a full-time job. Some people are, I've ridden with teachers. I've ridden with tech startup founders that are just making money on the side as a kind of a side hustle. And it's really changed. I mean, here in Austin, Uber got, kind of blacklisted out of the city for almost a year, and people were scrambling because this was a way of life of how they would get around. Some people got rid of cars, and that was their means to get to and from work, and it really did it in a tailspin. Not to mention, it increased DUIs in Austin because people use that as a means to, get home from certain places. Same thing with Airbnb. I mean, if you think about the amount of revenue that Airbnb has done just in the last 5 years, more or less, they weren't even around 10, 15 years ago. The same concept of, are you actually going to rent out a room in your home or your apartment? And especially, a lot of your millennials, they're not booking hotels. They're booking Airbnb. Why? It's cheaper. They get to stay in places that they could potentially never afford. And they feel comfortable in this. And people are building relationships and meeting friends this way and things like that. So, hotels, revenue has gone down in a lot of these places. Now you have HomeAway and these other guys that, have made this huge kind of their own marketplace and e-commerce and, to rent out your places from that perspective. We didn't have Dropbox. We didn't have Hulu. We didn't have Tinder. Think about Nest. Think about the Ring doorbell. If I would told you that, hey, we're going to roll out this thermostat and, random consumers who are not electricians are going to take out their current thermostat, and by online information and the app, you're going to install your own thermostat. People would say consumers are never going to do that. They're not trained to do that. That's, not something that they're going to do. And, now, you get bought by Google and, most people on Internet of Things, it's a huge rising demographic. So what does this mean? This means if you're thinking inside of your box and you're not thinking outside of the box, if you're trying to think to yourself as a retail that you don't need to change, you don't need to be aware of what